Mario Borio is the chief economist for the Bank for International Settlements, which is basically the central bankers' bank. Wrote a paper about 2013, 2014, I think, and it was called "And the Movie Plays On." So broadly speaking, we had the financial crisis in 2008, and subsequently, most monetary policy subsequently has been a cause, has led up to the events of the last couple of weeks. In my view, it's the issue we have seen over the last week with three different banks, three main banks going to the wall. There's a couple more in the US, obviously. It's just been as a result of policy causing an environment where these institutions were no longer viable. So we started off the week with SVB in the States, where it broadly had a load of government bonds on its balance sheet, and these bonds, it was encouraged to hold these bonds because of regulatory rules to match its liability and assets. It had a lot of these bonds, and when monetary policy changed, suddenly these bond interest rates went up, and suddenly these bonds were worth an awful lot less. And it had a solvency issue, and it also had a liquidity issue, and it couldn't carry on. So basically, it went bust as a result of policy, broadly speaking. Policy that led to it holding the things at low interest rates in the first place, and policy that removed interest rates and ended up having things on its balance sheet that were worth less and caused it to go bust. And then you moved across, and at the beginning of the week, that was what people thought was a local issue in the US. And then what happened was that people realised it possibly wasn't a local issue in the US. And if they looked across and appreciated that these bonds that all the banks had bought when interest rates were very low because of QE, basically interest rates were negative or on the floor, suddenly interest rates are now at 4 or 5% or more. And obviously the price has fallen, so everyone has got these bonds on their balance sheet, and everyone's nursing a loss. And then, so obviously, crystallising the losses, but you get the spreadsheet out, and you can work out where the losses are. And that basically was the next sort of domino to go was Credit Suisse. And Credit Suisse is unfortunate insofar as it hadn't had a great 15 years. I'm not going to be patronising or condescending or wise after the event, but everyone knows that in terms of strategic issues, Credit Suisse had its fair share. And so that was middle of the week. And of course, the Swiss authorities sort of stepped in and were providing a backstop. We were going to lend to Credit Suisse, and people thought maybe by Thursday that was the end of it. That was the ring fence. And then you got to the end of the week, and then as we saw over the weekend, the Swiss authorities felt moved to step in and force the merger, if you like, or the acquisition of Credit Suisse by UBS. And then there were one, which is a real shame. And then within that, the central bankers have also wiped out what are called the AT1 bondholders, which was this special new form of bondholders formed after the global financial crisis, where people assumed that would be converted into bank equity in the event of a rescue. And that's not happened, and that's caused more collywobbles this week. So in terms of policy, and this is where, I set up the International Sustainability Institute, and I talk about, sustainability comes in many different forms, and basically fiscal and financial sustainability are the two issues that I'm concerned with. But that's quite in a traditional sense as well, in terms of these huge macroeconomic imbalances, such as there's 15 years of zero interest rates and QE, build up their own set of problems. And what's happened, in my view, over the last sort of week or two, we've seen the crystallisation from higher interest rates of problems that have been built up by central bank policy in the first place. So we had the financial crisis, and central bankers were found to be wanting that their oversight hadn't been good enough, people thought. So they then set new rules for regulation of the banking system. Supposedly that would make the banking system safer. But that was on the one hand. But on the other hand, they then effectively implemented monetary policy that just pumped money into the financial system for the next 15 years, where we ended up, as of beginning of this year, like global financial assets being double the value of they were in 2008, global levels of debt being 2 or 3 times more than at the times of the financial crisis, but global economic activity being nothing more than a quarter or a third more, and in some cases, in some parts of the world, little more than it was in 2008. And that has created itself a whole set of imbalances. So when the central banks act and raised interest rates to put the genie back in the bottle of inflation, which again others would say they were culpable for being asleep at the wheel again on that front, what they've done is they've pushed the bubble down one area and then it's popped up somewhere else, and we're seeing a manifestation of there was too much QE in the system for too long, and people haven't invested in productive activity. So, we were talking earlier about the Resolution Foundation talking today about UK wages being no more than they were in 2008. So capital hasn't been deployed into productive investment, into things that people can have economic activity and make that cake bigger for everybody. What it's gone into financial asset valuations. It's gone into pumping up, providing more levels of debt for private equity purchases. So the same assets have just commanded a higher price. And once you suck all that back out of the system, you'll find that it's like a blancmange. You take it out too early and it just deflates. And that deflation, that blancmange deflating, is what's worrying people this week. Is like, actually, have we just catalysed another round of crisis like 2008?
And you've mentioned a couple of times, these are global issues, aren't they? This isn't stuff that is happening in Guernsey, offshore, or the European, just for the European banks. Silicon Valley Bank, when we were reading news about that, it might have sounded like it was happening far away, but it's all linked, isn't it?
And I suppose the big worry for markets this week is same as 2008. It seemed to be an American crisis, nothing to do with us over here, and it didn't take long for it to be one global crisis. The issue was that beginning of last week, people thought it was just a US issue in a specific sector of lending to the tech sector, but then the authorities went to act, and they basically they underwrote losses not just for the people who had insured deposits but the uninsured deposits. So people saying, well, why did they do that? What do they know that we don't? And then people started looking, and then they realised that what was the problem at SVB was the fact that they had these bonds that were no longer worth what they bought for them, and therefore on their balance sheet was suddenly not what it once was. And that issue was across the piece for everybody, and basically everyone's attention looked to, and what you don't want to happen is everyone looking for the next problem. The authorities have got to move quickly to try and draw a line at some point. But my position is, though, this whole issue is a result of misguided policy for 15 years. So after 2008, we set off on the wrong track. And we're, I don't want to sound too pessimistic, like at the end of the line of that track. But, we've had monetary policy that's, compounded the original problems. And then we've had it, with the interest rate rises to alleviate to try and put the inflation genie back in the bottle, causing further financial instability.
We're still on that track, though, aren't we? So not asking you to ask the genie or look in the crystal ball, but what could happen next?
I do feel that for the read across, there's going to be a lot of people with illiquid investments that are based on debt, where the valuations are going to suddenly have to be revisited. And I think we might find lots of investors in alternative assets finding that they aren't what they once were. So I think we could see the issue, the fine move across into different sectors, into the investment sector. I hope it doesn't, but we could have a year or two of really bad economic pain. This sounds like a heartless thing to say, but we keep deferring the pain, and that's the problem. So actually, what we did in 2008, and then I showed you earlier about bank balance sheets. So QE happened in 2008 because of the financial crisis, and then QE happened because of the Eurozone crisis, and then QE happened because of the pandemic. So there's always been medicine applied. It's been slowly killing the patient, and underlying it, and it sounds very emotionally detached, the actual economic model, the capitalist economic model, is seriously poorly, and the medicine that's been applied isn't working. And the problem is that we've got a patient that's very poor, and what the patient's not doing is creating enough wealth to make everyone's quality standard of living high enough. And we've had 15 years of it not really getting any bigger, really. And now people spend all their time arguing about how that wealth is distributed and how that economic activity is distributed. So my concern is that we find ourselves in policy terms about people arguing over the distributional aspects without giving thought to how it's made, the wealth is made in the first place. And that's been something that's been going sort of in parallel. While policy has been applied in the monetary sphere that's not been working, but it's been deferring the pain, we've had a parallel debate about the fact that it's the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, and we're just all getting poorer, frankly, and that's been the problem. Especially we feel an awful lot poorer. So the hope is that the movie has to stop.
Yeah.
And it's clearly about you have to stop, take stock, and say, look, this policy mix is not a sustainable solution. It hasn't worked. It's got us 15 years down the road, and we're just in a worse state of affairs than we were. In terms of going forward, have I got a crystal ball? No. But if we don't change tack, we will just see, in 150 years' time, we're a footnote in the history books of the Western capitalist model.
You're not a lone voice on a lot of these topics, though, are you? You said that there are other people, economists globally, who are all trying to get the same message across. Why?
There
why
are, but it's a minority. I mean, like I said, Claudio Bow, because he's almost like my economic hero. But there's a few voices out there. But the issue is, I've written about this in my local column. Basically, we live in a very, is it unplural? Can you say unplural? We don't have much plurality of thought nowadays. Basically, if you look at, there's nothing that passes for economic debate in the mainstream press. In fact, there's nothing that passes for economic debate in the UK, in UK politics. There's nothing that passes for economic debate in the European Union. Their economic and governance structures basically bring a consensus view to the world. And, it takes you a very long time to realise that you might be going down the wrong road. Yeah. So there are a few people, but the global policy consensus, it's almost by construction deliberately, brings everyone into one view. And I don't think that's been a good thing for us. So there are a few voices, but not enough. My concern would be, it's in an awful lot of people's short-term interest not to take the pain, to kick the can down the road a little bit more. Something, I mean, you all know, I've got a friend who I sort of used to take the mickey out of me because I said once, there's an economist, what I'd really love to happen would be to have a law or a rule named after me. And I'll rue saying it to them ever since. I pulled my leg ever since. So occasionally in my writings, you'll see this, I call it Sloan's Law, and it's a bit tongue-in-cheek. It's like a bit of infamy sort of thing. It's a bit Sloan's Law, and I basically say things can be unsustainable for a very, very, very long time. And we could probably carry on like this again for another 10 years. But it would just result in the same outcome. More instability and less growth, and we'll all be poorer. But that's the road we've been on for 15 years.
Selfishly, though, we live in a small island. We want Guernsey's finance sector to do well, don't we? Because we all want to do well. And we're being told by our government that tax changes are needed. We know there was the big tax review debate, and we know that you obviously had some input into the kind of the public discussion on that. But what does all this mean for Guernsey's finance sector? Is it all bad news? Well,
first thing is, in terms of the overall picture for Guernsey, yes, we're well off, but we've been getting poorer, and we've been getting poorer for the last 15 years, and our finance sector has been shrinking. There's some things we can do, and there's some things we can't do. But what the change we can affect is that in terms of we've been allowing our cost base to increase, and we've been selling less, and it's been costing us more to produce. And that's basically economics 101. And we've been using the same revenues spread over more and more people. And going forward, we've got less workers with the demographics. So we've got to fix the productivity problem, and that's got to be done locally. But broadly speaking, within that's our local environment. Within the broader environment, and it's that bigger picture stuff. What can we do much about it? Well, the bigger picture stuff is that in terms of the global capitalist system has had a bit of a rum deal for the last 15 years. It hasn't been producing the goods for the reasons we've outlined. And that what we've got to hope for is a reinvigoration of the sort of capitalist financial model that worked well for 200 years up to the financial crisis, and produced amazing increases in the standard of living. We seem to have lost faith in that. It can be done in a sustainable way. This is not about an exclusive, mutually exclusive with sustainability. But within that, we've got to make the case of the offshore finance sector within that, that broader capitalist system. And what we can do then is to make that case, and which is what the Institute also has a role in doing, in that to basically take that case for the free flow of capital into real productive investment as opposed to just financial assets, as a component of global raising global economic growth, and making that case and standing up for ourselves and selling our story and selling our role is something we haven't done for a long time. 15 years of being cowed and basically, withdrawing and agreeing to more rules, agreeing to, more measures, as opposed to standing firm and saying, do you know what we do is pretty useful for, global GDP. And it's another item on the list of things that haven't been done for the last 15 years. Again, so that's what we can do locally. But in terms of that, how much is then our gift, we shall see.